The chapel was dressed in white and gold, the kind of white only powerful families trust. The kind that looks innocent even when the people beneath it are not. On Sunday night, inside the Santoro estate, every important family in the city had come to watch Matteo Santoro marry Celeste Moretti and bury the last ghost of the woman they believed had ruined him. Matteo Santoro, the man newspapers described with careful words and frightened eyes, was standing beneath 100 candles in a black suit so exact it looked like armor. Celeste Moretti, graceful, elegant, born into the kind of family that turned alliances into weddings, waited a few steps away from him with her chin lifted and her future arranged. And Serafina Santoro, Matteo's stepmother, moved through that chapel like a queen inspecting a throne she had already claimed. To the guests, it was a perfect union. To Celeste, it looked like duty dressed as destiny. To Serafina, it looked like victory after 6 patient years. But to me, Rosalea Costa, the woman Matteo believed had ended our baby and disappeared, it looked like a lie standing in expensive flowers. I am telling you this after the vows that never happened. After Celeste removed her gloves and stepped away from the altar. After Serafina's perfect evening cracked open in front of everyone she had lied to. And after my son looked at Matteo Santoro with wide, trusting eyes and asked him whether papas were allowed to make mistakes if they were still learning. What Matteo said, why he spent 6 years grieving a child who had never died. Why I ran while still carrying his son. And how the most feared man in our city became my little boy's friend before he knew he was his father. All of it began 3 days earlier, with a blue paper airplane and a child who thought serious men needed face holidays. Stay with me until the end, and if stories about buried truths and impossible second chances find you, subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Because to understand how Matteo Santoro met his own son before he knew the truth, I have to begin at St. Agnes Art House, where my 6-3-year old boy launched a paper airplane directly into danger. Nico Costa had one front tooth growing and crooked, a habit of asking questions at the exact wrong time, and the absolute conviction that paper airplanes had personalities. He was old enough to read street signs, young enough to believe glue could heal anything, and stubborn enough to insist that 6 3/4 mattered. Because the quarters were where important growing happened, he did not know who his father was. Matteo did not know the child he had mourned for 6 years was spending Tuesday afternoons painting stars in a brick building 12 blocks from the cathedral where he was supposed to get married. And I had spent 6 years making sure those two worlds never touched. I told myself silence was protection. I told myself distance was mercy. I told myself that being hated by Matteo was a smaller price than burying my son. 3 days before the wedding, Matteo came to St. Agnes because his foundation had funded a new children's art wing. He was meant to arrive, sign a plaque, take one photograph, and leave before the soft noise of children could reach whatever part of him still remembered tenderness. He did not come looking for me. He did not come looking for a child. He had no reason to imagine the little boy crouched on the hallway floor in dinosaur socks, folding a blue sheet of paper with grave concentration. Was the son he had once believed died before taking his first breath. One of Matteo's men saw Nico on the floor and told him to move aside. My son looked up slowly, as if the request itself were rude, then held up the half-folded airplane and said, "I am moving, Captain Sky is not. He is in surgery." The guard frowned. "Kid." Now, Nico pressed the paper plane to his chest with offended dignity. "You cannot rush surgery, that is how wings get feelings." The hallway went quiet. Parents stopped pretending not to stare. A volunteer carrying paint trays froze by the mural wall. The director of St. Agnes smiled too quickly in the way adults do when they are afraid something ordinary is about to become expensive. Everyone in that hallway knew Matteo Santoro by sight. Everyone knew armed men did not wait for children. Everyone knew fear usually made rooms move faster. But Matteo did not tell his man to push past my son. He lifted one hand and the guard stepped back. Then Matteo did something nobody expected. He bent down, one knee first, then the other, until he was at eye level with Nico. A feared man in a dark suit kneeling on a paint-splattered floor beside a child with glue on his fingers. What happened to Captain Sky? Mateo asked. Nico studied him seriously, deciding whether this tall stranger deserved information. Crash landing, he said at last. Too much speed. Not enough listening. Mateo glanced at the bent wing. That happens. Nico narrowed his eyes. You know about airplanes? Not really. You look like you know about crashing. Mateo actually paused at that, as if the words had hit somewhere unprotected. Do I? Nico nodded. Your face does. A few people in the hallway made small shocked sounds. But Mateo did not get angry, if anything. Something strange moved behind his eyes. Not amusement exactly, but surprise that someone this small had spoken to him without fear. He asked Nico his name. Nico Costa, my son said proudly. And I am 6 3/4. The quarters matter? They are the best part. Everybody steals the quarters. Mateo went still for a second. He did not know why. He only knew the number hurt in a place he had not visited in years. If the baby he had lost had lived, that child would have been almost this age. Old enough to argue with adults. Old enough to turn paper into flight. Old enough to stand in front of him without knowing he had once grieved him. Nico held out the paper airplane. You have angry eyebrows, he informed Mateo. Captain Sky says those are bad for lifting. Mateo's mouth almost moved. Captain Sky talks? He is in leadership. I see. And if you want to be his friend, there are rules. For the first time, the dark machine of the hallway disappeared. And Mateo Santoro, the man my nightmares still wore like a face, asked my son what the rules were. Nico raised one finger. Do not step on airplanes. A second finger. Do not use grown-up thunder voices on children. A third. When I say face holiday, you have to stop looking like somebody stole your birthday. That time? Mateo did smile. Very slightly, more in his eyes than his mouth. But enough for Nico to point at him in triumph. There, my son said. You can do it. When Mateo told him his name, Nico repeated it once, then shook his head. Too many letters. I will call you Teo. No one in Mateo's world called him Teo. His men did not, his enemies did not, and certainly not Celeste Moretti. The bride waiting for him in 3 days, but my son said it like a gift. Not an insult, and Mateo let him keep it. That was the moment I walked into the hallway with a box of brushes in my arms and saw my child smiling at the man I had spent 6 years hiding him from. Nico turned first, his whole face lit up. Mama, he said. Meet Teo. He has crash face. But he is practicing, for one heartbeat. Nothing moved. Not the director, not the volunteers. Not Mateo's guards, not even me. The box slipped in my hands and brushes clattered across the floor. Mateo looked up from his knees. And the past I had outrun for 6 long years found me beside a mural of painted planets and children's handprints. I had imagined seeing Mateo again 100 different ways. In all of them, there had been darkness. Men, vehicles, shouted orders, lawyers, threats. I had never imagined fluorescent lights, drying clay. And our son smiling between us with paper cuts on his fingers. Mateo rose slowly. His gaze held my face with a kind of disbelief that looked almost violent. I saw recognition hit him, then memory, then the old wound opening under both. He took in my plain sweater, the cheap apron tied around my waist, the ringless hand gripping a paint-stained box. The life that clearly had not been built beside him. Then his eyes moved to Nico, not with recognition, not yet. With something sharper, he saw a child at my side. He saw a child who called me Mama, and because of the lie he had carried for 6 years, he saw what he believed was proof of my cruelty. The woman he thought had chosen to end his baby now alive with another boy. Mama? Nico asked softly, why did your face go winter? I forced air into my lungs and crouched to gather the brushes I had dropped. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly missed half of them. I'm fine, sweetheart. He looked between us. Do you know Teo? The question entered the hallway like a blade. I straightened slowly and met Mateo's eyes. They were not soft eyes. They were not the eyes from old kitchens and whispered promises and hands spread across my pregnant stomach in wonder. They were 6 years of grief shaped into a man. Yes, I said carefully. I know him. Nico brightened. Good. Then I do not have to explain all the rules. One of Mateo's guards shifted behind him. But Mateo never looked away from me. I could feel the room watching. People knew enough not to ask questions, but not enough to understand why the air had changed. I turned to Nico before fear reached his face. Sweetheart. Take Captain Sky to Miss Helena for a minute. I need to talk to Mr. Santoro. Nico frowned. He is Teo now. Just for a minute, Miss Helena. The art teacher stepped forward and held out her hand. Nico hesitated, then looked up at Mateo. You are not allowed to disappear without saying bye, he said. Mateo's jaw tightened in a way only I noticed. I won't, Nico accepted that answer as if it settled the world. He took Miss Helena's hand and walked toward the studio room, stopping only once to look back and make sure Captain Sky's surgeon and my winter face were still where he left them. The moment the studio door closed, the softness left the hallway. Mateo took one step toward me, not enough to touch. Enough to threaten every wall I had built. Rosalia. He said my name like he had not used it in years, and hated that it still belonged in his mouth. I swallowed. Not here. Where then? Somewhere you can leave again? Please. He looked past me toward the studio. That boy. Every part of me sharpened. What about him? Is he yours? What does that matter to you? His voice lowered. Answer me. Yes. He is my son. Mateo went utterly still. I watched the answer strike him. Not because he knew the truth, but because he believed only the lie. To him, I had wanted motherhood, just not with him, to him. The wound he had buried was standing in front of him wearing my child's face and another man's absence. You wanted a child, he said. My throat tightened. Do not do this here. You wanted to be a mother, Mateo. His expression hardened at the sound of his name. Then why did you destroy mine? No matter how many times I had prepared for that accusation, hearing it from him with our sun painting stars 20 feet away still felt like being cut open with a memory. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to tell him that Nico was not another child, that the baby he had mourned had spent the morning arguing with me over cereal and whether paper airplanes preferred names. I wanted to tell him the grave he had carried in his chest had never been occupied. But the old fear came first. If Mateo knew, Serafina would know. If Serafina knew, Vittorio would move. And I had not spent 6 years sleeping lightly and moving quietly and inventing new versions of my life just to fail in a bright hallway because grief looked back at me with Mateo's eyes. I do not owe you this conversation, I said. He stared at me with something close to fury. You owed me one 6 years ago. You think I do not know that? You left me with blood and silence. I looked at him then, really looked. The city feared Mateo Santoro because he had become impossible to reach. But I remembered the man before that, the one who painted a nursery ceiling pale blue because he said no child of his would sleep under darkness. The one who drove too fast to prenatal appointments because he was terrified of being late. The one who pressed his ear to my stomach and spoke to a baby who could not hear him yet. That man had been buried too. Then keep believing what they told you, I whispered. It is safer than the truth. His eyes narrowed immediately. What does that mean? It means leave us alone. You think I can walk away after this? I think you are getting married on Sunday. The mention of the wedding landed between us like ice. And I think, I continued, forcing each word out evenly. Whatever you believe about me, Nico has nothing to do with your grief. Do not bring it near him. His gaze snapped to me at the name, then to the studio door again. He did not miss the way I said my son, not ours, not yours. I hated myself for needing the wall those words built before he could answer. The studio door opened and Nico ran out holding a painted paper star. Mama, Captain Sky got promoted. He stopped when he felt the air. Are we in trouble? No, sweetheart. Nico looked up at Mateo. Are you coming next Tuesday? I froze. Mateo looked down at him, and for a second, the fury in his face fell away under something he did not understand. My son was not afraid of him. My son expected him. I don't know, Mateo said. Nico put both hands on his hips. That is not good friendship language. Better language is, I will try. Mateo's throat moved. Then I will try. I took Nico's hand before my own face betrayed me. We have to go. We left St. Agnes with Captain Sky tucked under my son's arm, and Mateo's eyes on my back all the way to the street. Nico talked the entire walk to the bus stop. He told me Mateo had improved his eyebrows. That serious people were easier to like when they bent down. That Captain Sky trusted him medium amount only. I answered where I could. But my body had already gone cold, because on the opposite side of the street, a silver sedan sat with its engine running. It was not one of Mateo's cars. The windows were dark. The driver looked down too slowly when I noticed him. Nico tugged my sleeve to show me a cloud shaped like a rabbit. And when I looked back, the sedan was pulling away. That should have been enough to send me running again. Instead I went home, locked both bolts, checked the stairwell twice, and made pasta for a little boy who could not understand why his mother had stopped smiling between stirs. We lived above a shuttered tailor shop on a narrow street where people minded their own grief. I had chosen that apartment because the windows faced 2 exits, and the hallway carried footsteps clearly. That night, Nico sat at the table swinging his legs and asked, "Did Teo make you sad?" I nearly dropped the pot lid. Why would you ask that? Because your smile is only on top. I sat across from him and tucked a curl behind his ear. Teo is someone I knew a long time ago. Was he bad? The question hurt because it had no simple place to land. I thought about Mateo before the lies. I thought about the man he became after them. I thought about the bruised grief leaves when it has nowhere to go. No, I said quietly. He was not bad. Then why did your face go winter? Because the past found us. Because the father you never knew touched a paper airplane and felt something he could not name. Because the people I ran from may have seen you today. Instead I said, sometimes people from before make grown-ups remember things they worked very hard to survive. Nico nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than I wanted him to. Then he twirled his fork and asked the question that split me cleanly down the middle. Can I still be his friend? I looked away too fast. We'll talk about it later. He sighed with the full exhausted tragedy of 6 3/4. Later is grown up for no. Not always, mostly. Despite everything. I smiled, Nico smiled back, and for a moment the fear loosened. Then my phone vibrated on the counter. Unknown number, no message, just a missed call. I barely slept. The city outside our window kept moving, but every sound felt closer than it should have. Every engine too slow. Every step on the stairs too deliberate. Across town, Mateo did not sleep either. I learned later that after I left St. Agnes, he signed the donation plaque without reading it, ignored the director's speech, and spent the entire drive back to the Santoro estate staring out the window like a man trying to do math against a wound. When he reached the house, Renzo Falco was waiting in the library. Renzo had been with Mateo for 14 years, first as a driver, then as an enforcer. Then as the one man who could tell him the truth without ending up on the floor. He knew my name. Everyone close to Mateo knew it. Even if they avoided saying it. Mateo poured a drink, did not touch it, and said, "Find out everything about Rosalia Costa." Renzo's expression shifted slightly. Everything? Where she lives, where she works, how old the boy is, who his father is, why she said the truth is dangerous, why there was a silver sedan across from street. Agnes, everything. Renzo hesitated once. And if the boy is nothing? Mateo looked at him with a kind of terror disguised as control. Then I will know I lost my mind for 10 minutes in a hallway. And if he is something? Mateo set the glass down untouched. Then someone lied to me before I marry the wrong woman. By dawn. Renzo had the first pieces. Rosalia Costa lived above a closed tailor shop. Paid cash when possible. Worked part-time at St. Agnes Art House and part-time doing embroidery repairs at home. No husband, no visible male partner, Nico Costa. Born 4 months and 3 weeks after the night Mateo had been told our baby was terminated. Emergency contact, Rosalia only, father section on all school forms blank. Pediatric records sparse, several clinic changes. Multiple addresses over 6 years. 4 months and 3 weeks, that number changed everything. Renzo placed the file on Mateo's desk while staff downstairs carried flowers into the estate for Sunday's wedding. Serafina was already choosing table settings. Celeste's family was finalizing guests, somewhere inside that house. Everyone was preparing to celebrate a future built over a lie. Mateo opened the file and stared at Nico's birthday until the page blurred. Then he stood so fast the chair struck the wall. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Home. The boy leaves for school at 8:15. Mateo grabbed his coat. Renzo stepped in front of him. "Which only a very loyal or very foolish man would do, if that child is yours. The first thing he cannot see is you breaking his mother." Mateo stopped. The truth of that hit him. For 6 years. Every version of me he had imagined ended in accusation. None of them included a paper airplane, a birthday counted in quarters, or the possibility that his grief had been manufactured. When I opened my apartment door that morning, Mateo was standing in the dim hallway alone. No guards, no raised voice, no weapon in sight. But he looked more dangerous than he had in St. Agnes because now he was not guessing. He had dates in his eyes. I tried to shut the door. His hand caught it before it closed. "Nico was born 4 months and 3 weeks after you disappeared," he said. My heartbeat stumbled so hard it hurt. "Move your hand. You were still pregnant when you left." "Not here. Tell me I'm wrong." Behind me. I heard Nico in the kitchen, narrating a battle between 2 cereal pieces as if the fate of empires depended on it. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door almost closed behind me. "Please go." His face changed at the word please. Not softened. Something worse, it told him enough. "Is he mine?" I looked past him at the cracked stair rail. The dim bulb overhead. The life I had stitched together because there had been no other choice. For 6 years I had carried the truth like a blade I could never set down. I had lied to schools, doctors, landlords, neighbors. And once or twice even to myself, but I had never stood in front of Mateo and said the words out loud. Maybe some part of me had always known this moment would find me. "He is mine," I whispered. Mateo's voice shook for the first time. "I am asking if he is mine too." The hallway seemed to tilt. "Yes," I said. He did not move. The man the city called ruthless stood in front of my door like someone had reached into his chest and returned an organ he had been forced to bury. "Yes?" he repeated. I nodded once because if I spoke again I would break. His hand slid from the frame. "You let me believe he was dead." "No, you hid my son from me." "I hid him from the people who tried to make sure he would never be born." His eyes sharpened immediately. "What are you talking about?" I shook my head. "You need to leave, Rosalia." "No. You found me once by accident," I said. My voice shaking harder now. "Do not make me run again." Something in his face cracked then. Not wide, not visible to anyone else maybe. But I knew that face. "You think I would take him from you?" "I think your family tried to erase him before he had a name. That stopped him." Truly stopped him. I watched anger begin to turn inside him. Not disappear, never that easily. But turn toward a shape he had refused to imagine. "Who?" I looked at the floorboards. "Rosalia?" Silence was answer enough. "Serafina?" he asked. I did not respond. "Vittorio?" My breath caught, the apartment door behind me opened a little wider, and Nico appeared with cereal milk on his lip, and Captain Sky repaired with extra tape. "Mama, why are you hiding Teo in the hallway?" I turned too quickly. "Go inside, sweetheart." Nico looked at Mateo and his whole face lit up. "You came back." Mateo's expression changed so fast it hurt to witness. He lowered himself slightly, not fully kneeling, but enough that Nico did not have to tilt his head back so far. "I said I would try," Mateo said. Nico nodded. "Good. Because vanishing is rude." "No. Mateo said quietly. It is. Nico accepted that and disappeared back into the kitchen when I told him breakfast still existed whether he respected it or not. Once the door closed again, Mateo looked at me. Tell me. So I told him only enough to keep the floor from vanishing. I told him the night the brakes failed on the car taking me to dinner with Serafina. I told him I woke in a private clinic owned through 3 shell companies and one holy lie. I told him a nurse whispered that my baby's heartbeat was still strong while Serafina told me Mateo had signed me away for the family's safety. I told him I heard Vittorio say the words solve the problem before the boss comes back. I told him another nurse, terrified and kind, smuggled me out through a laundry entrance before dawn with hospital tape still on my wrist. I did not tell him every detail, some memories still had teeth. But I told him enough to make his certainty rot where it stood. I was shown consent papers, he said finally. His voice rough. With your signature. I never signed. I heard audio of you saying you would not bring my child into my world. I said I would not bring our child into a house where your family controlled the locks. His head turned slightly, like a man hearing his own past translated correctly for the first time. I was told the procedure was your choice, he said. I was under sedation. I was told you refused to see me. I was asking for you until they increased the medication. He turned away and braced one hand against the wall. For a second I thought he might put his fist through it. Instead he lowered his head like the hallway had become too small to contain what was happening inside him. I hated you, he said. The confession landed softly and still hurt. I know. I buried our son in my mind. And he was eating cereal behind your door. My hand covered my mouth before I could stop it, before either of us could speak again. My phone buzzed in my pocket, unknown number. This time there was a message, you should have kept running. The boy won't reach 7 if Santoro knows he breathes. I stared at the words until they blurred. Mateo saw my face. What is it? I tried to hide the screen. But my hand shook too badly to lie. I turned it toward him. He read the message once, then again, and whatever remained of the broken man disappeared behind something older and colder. Pack a bag, he said. No, Rosalia, this is exactly why I stayed gone. They already found you. Because you stood in my hallway. Because they were watching before I arrived. I thought of the silver sedan outside St. Agnes and went cold. Mateo lowered his voice. Listen to me carefully. I am not taking Nico from you. I am not forcing truth on him today. I am not dragging him into my house and calling it protection, but from this moment, no one touches either of you without going through me. I wanted not to believe him. God help me. I wanted that because believing Mateo had once cost me everything except the child in my kitchen. But the phone buzzed again before I could answer. Run again if you want. We know his school route now. I closed my eyes, from inside the apartment. Nico called, Mama, Captain Sky is requesting jam. The ordinary sweetness of it nearly destroyed me. Mateo looked toward the sound, and when he spoke again, the command was gone. Please, that word from him did more damage than any threat could have. I packed 2 bags in 7 minutes, hands moving faster than thought. Shirts, socks, Nico's inhaler, toothbrush, school notebook. The green sweater he insisted was luckier than weather. And Captain Sky because my son said airplanes got anxious in unfamiliar houses. Mateo stood by the door making low calls I could not fully hear. No sirens, no shouting. Just the quiet rearrangement of danger. When we stepped onto the street, it looked almost normal. A woman carried bread. A bus sighed at the corner. A man walked a dog too large for his arm. But Mateo's people were there now. Dressed like ordinary men, standing like walls. Nico noticed immediately. Are those your friends? He asked Mateo. Something like that. Nico leaned close to me and whispered too loudly. They also need face holidays. For 1 second. Through all the terror and 6 years of bitterness. I almost laughed. Mateo heard it. His eyes changed. I hated that some part of him could still reach me in silence. He did not take us to the Santoro estate. Maybe he knew I would have jumped from the moving car first. Instead, He took us to a small lake house on the edge of the city, hidden behind old cypress trees and a rusted iron gate. The kind of place that belonged to no family in public records and every secret in private ones. Renzo opened the door before we reached it. His eyes moved to Nico with careful respect, not curiosity. And that bought him more grace from me than he probably realized. There are 2 bedrooms upstairs, he said. Kitchen is stocked. No staff inside. I am not a prisoner, I told Matteo. His gaze met mine. Then don't act like one. The men outside are for them, not for you. Them? He did not need to say the names. That first night, Nico inspected the lake house like an exhausted king evaluating exile. He approved the creaking stairs, disapproved the guest room curtains, asked if Lake slept, and demanded to know whether Matteo knew how to make grilled cheese. I know people who do, Matteo said. That was not the question. So the most feared man in our city stood in a quiet kitchen 40 minutes, later burning butter while my son judged him with crossed arms from a bar stool. You are flipping too soon, Nico said. It is bread. It is strategy. Matteo tried again. The sandwich darkened on one side. That one is dead, Nico informed him. Do not blame yourself. Some cheese gives up. I stood in the doorway and watched the 2 of them, my son in mismatched pajamas. Matteo with his sleeves rolled up and his attention fixed on a frying pan as if it might insult him. For one impossible moment, the room became a ghost of the life we should have had. Morning light and small complaints and harmless failure. Then Renzo entered with a folder. And the ghost died. Matteo saw his face. What? Renzo set the folder on the table. The separation documents, I frowned. What separation documents? Matteo looked at me sharply. Whatever he expected, it was not confusion. The ones you filed 3 months after you disappeared. I filed nothing. Silence spread through the kitchen. Renzo opened the folder. There was my name at the bottom of a petition close enough to my real signature to make my stomach turn. Beside it sat a letter claiming I wanted no contact. No claim on the Santoro name, no property, and no remaining family. One line made my knees weaken. There is no living child of this union. Matteo saw me read it. Something changed in his face. Some last stubborn piece of the lie collapsing under its own cruelty. I was given these by Serafina, he said. And a lawyer tied to Vittorio. I never saw them. I signed a non-contest acknowledgement because they told me you wanted everything ended quietly. You signed? The word came out broken. His jaw tightened. I thought you had already left me in every way that mattered. Renzo placed a second page beside the first. Court stamp is fraudulent. Filing path was altered. It can be dismantled. I looked up slowly. So what am I then? Matteo's eyes found mine over forged ink and 6 stolen years. My wife, he said quietly. On paper and in the truth they stole from us. I could not answer. Upstairs, floorboards creaked and Nico called for water. I left the kitchen before my face. Betrayed me later, after I settled him. After Captain Sky was tucked under his pillow because airplanes apparently hated darkness. I came back downstairs and found Matteo alone on the porch facing the lake. The night smelled like damp wood and unfinished things. For a while neither of us spoke. Then he said, I don't know how to stand near him. I folded my arms tightly. He is a child, Matteo. Not a confession. I know. He cannot carry what they did to us. I know. If he learns the truth, he learns it gently, not because you are angry. Not because Serafina corners you. Not because you need him to heal something in you. Matteo turned toward me. The porch light cut half his face into gold and half into shadow. Together? I had not meant to promise him anything. But I thought of Nico's trust so reckless and pure it frightened me. I thought of how easily he had handed friendship to a man who did not know he deserved to tremble. Together, I said. The next morning should have been quieter. It was not at 11:30. Renzo came in from outside with news that froze the air in the kitchen. The silver sedan from St. Agnes belonged to a driver who had worked twice before for shell companies linked to Vittorio. There had also been a man parked near Nico's school that morning until Mateo's men repositioned. Nico was sitting on the floor drawing clouds with angry eyebrows. "Why did everybody stop talking?" he asked. Mateo crouched beside him. "Because grown-ups are deciding something boring." Nico considered this. "Then decide faster." Mateo's mouth moved despite himself. "Working on it." I did not send Nico to school that afternoon, but he had art therapy at St. Agnes. And keeping him locked inside a hidden house would have frightened him more than honesty in pieces. Mateo argued. I argued back. In the end, we agreed on protection. Nico would not feel like bars. The attempt happened at 4:14 in the afternoon. Later men would describe it with clean words like intercepted and contained. It was neither. It was 20 seconds of raw terror wrapped in ordinary daylight. Agnes had a side gate opening onto a narrow lane, used by parents who wanted to avoid traffic and attention. Miss Helena was walking Nico toward that gate while I waited in the car. Mateo had stepped away to take a call from Renzo about a second vehicle near the block. A white van rolled slowly to the curb. Not silver, not the same car, smarter. A man in a maintenance jacket got out carrying a clipboard and a laminated badge. He smiled at Miss Helena and said there had been a plumbing issue near the main entrance. That Rosalia had asked him to bring Nico around front. Miss Helena hesitated. That hesitation saved my child. Because Nico looked at the badge, then at the man's eyes. And something in him noticed what children notice long before adults admit it. Softness in the voice and danger in the face. He took one step back and shook his head. "No," he said. "My mama says front changes need the sunflower word," the man blinked. There was no sunflower word. I had taught Nico to demand one from anyone unexpected. The man reached anyway. Miss Helena pulled Nico behind her. I saw the movement from the car and the world became nothing but distance. Nico shouted, "Mama!" I was already running, but Mateo moved faster. He came around the corner like something released from a cage. One of his men slammed the van door before a second man could get out. Renzo caught the fake maintenance worker by the wrist and drove him against the gate hard enough to make the badge crack. I reached Nico and fell around him on the pavement. Arms over his shoulders, his hair, the back of his small shaking head. "I saw the eyes," he kept saying. "Mama, I saw the eyes. I remembered the sunflower." I remembered I did it right. "You did it right," I said into his hair. "You did everything right, my brave boy." My smart boy. A few feet away, Mateo had the fake worker by the front of his jacket. His face was no longer the almost smile Nico knew. It was the face that made other men lower their own. "Who sent you?" Mateo asked. The man said nothing. Mateo looked at Renzo. "Take him." I knew what those words could mean in Mateo's world. I looked up sharply. "Not here." His eyes found mine instantly. "Nico can hear you." Something human returned to his face. He released the man into Renzo's grip without another word. His people moved fast, blocking our view, shoving both attackers into separate cars. No gunfire, no shouting. Just a violence so controlled it made my skin crawl. Nico pulled back enough to look at Mateo. "You came." Mateo knelt in front of us, careful, slower now. As if he had finally understood the size of what he had almost lost twice. "Yes," he said. "Fast." "Yes." Nico nodded, breathing hard. "Good." Because I was being brave and that takes full attention. A sound escaped Mateo then. Half laugh, half pain. "You were." Nico studied him. Then did the thing that broke something open in all of us? He reached forward and wrapped his arms around Mateo's neck. I watched Mateo freeze. Then close his eyes as if the weight of a small child's trust was heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. His hand rose, hesitated, then settled against Nico's back with unbearable gentleness. Something inside me gave way. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the first crack. That night Mateo did not ask whether I planned to run again. He already knew the answer had changed. After Nico fell asleep between 2 stuffed pillows and 1 folded paper airplane, Mateo stood in the living room with the folder Renzo had built thicker and uglier. There were transfer records, clinic logs, Calls routed through shell numbers. A frightened former nurse willing to testify if given protection. And proof that Serafina had met privately with Celeste's family lawyer before my forged separation had even settled. They built the wedding on top of this, Mateo said, voice low and flat. I looked at the pages and felt 6 years of fear begin to take a shape I could finally hate with precision. He turned to me. Sunday ends. You can cancel it quietly. No. Mateo. They erased you quietly. They stole my son quietly. They signed grief in my name quietly. His eyes met mine. I will not give them silence as a reward. I thought of Nico sleeping upstairs. Captain Sky on his chest like a medal. He is not a weapon for your revenge. No, Mateo said immediately. He is the reason this does not become revenge. That stopped me. He stepped closer, still leaving air between us. I want you there on Sunday. I shook my head before he finished. I will not walk into a room full of people who helped bury me. You will walk in because they no longer get to decide whether you exist. It will become a spectacle. Only if I let it. And Nico? He stays with Renzo until the room is safe. I wanted to refuse. Every survival instinct I owned still believed in doors, shadows, alternate routes. But running had stopped protecting my son the moment men with fake badges learned our schedule. Silence was no longer shelter. It was exposure. I ran once to save him. I said at last. I will not run again while he is old enough to remember it. Mateo lowered his head as if that sentence had become a vow he intended to borrow. Sunday arrived bright and merciless. By afternoon the Santoro estate looked like a palace built for a lie. White roses climbed stone columns. Gold chairs lined the chapel aisle. Crystal-cut sunlight from every angle. Men in dark suits stood at entrances pretending not to watch each other. Women wore diamonds heavy enough to count as threats. Families arrived smiling with the careful smiles of people who knew love was not the reason for any of this. Celeste Moretti waited upstairs in a dress so perfect it seemed untouched by weather. Pain or history. She was beautiful, yes. But what struck me most when I saw her later was not beauty. It was innocence in the wrong room. Celeste had agreed to an alliance, not a theft. She had been told Mateo was free. She had been told his first wife had ended a pregnancy and vanished. She had been told the past was tragic but settled. Serafina moved through the estate in silver silk, calm and immaculate. A woman who believed she had survived every loose thread. Vittorio remained near the back corridor speaking softly into phones, still thinking control meant permanence. Neither of them knew the driver from the silver sedan had already talked. Neither of them knew the nurse they paid to forget had remembered the sound of my voice asking for Mateo. Neither of them knew Renzo had spent the night pulling their careful lies into daylight. At 6 o'clock, Mateo stood at the altar in black. No flower in his lapel, no warmth on his face. To the guests, he looked like a man about to marry duty to me. Standing behind the rear doors with Nico beside me in a small navy jacket. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a grave with fire in his hands. Nico tugged my sleeve. Is Teo getting married? I knelt and touched his cheek. We had told him only enough that morning. That Mateo was someone important from before, that bad people had lied. That today we were helping truth come out where lies could not hide behind locked doors. Not if he is wise, I whispered. Nico considered that. Is wise a yes or a no? Today it is a no. The music began. The doors opened. The room turned. The first sound was not a gasp. It was the sudden absence of one. I walked in holding Nico's hand. Whispers split the chapel almost instantly. Rosalia, she's alive. The boy. Serafina's face lost color so quickly that for one savage second, I understood how much she had feared this moment. I was not supposed to return to that house alive, let alone walking, breathing. Holding the child she had tried to turn into paperwork. Celeste, halfway down the aisle, stopped. Her veil trembled once in the air-conditioned stillness. Mateo turned from the altar and looked at us. He did not look surprised, he looked finished. The officiant faltered, Mr. Santoro. Mateo lifted one hand. The room obeyed. There will be no wedding today, he said. The murmur that followed moved like fire through dry grass. Serafina recovered first, of course she did. Matteo, she said sharply, though her smile tried to remain in place. Do not humiliate this family on a misunderstanding. He looked at her with a calmness colder than anger. You humiliated this family when you forged my wife's separation, buried my living son on paper, and built an alliance over a crime. The room exploded. Celeste's hand rose slowly to her veil. But she did not remove it yet. Vittorio took one step forward. This is grief and manipulation. Rosalia came here too. Be quiet, Matteo said. Just that 2 words. Quiet enough that half the room leaned forward to hear them. Dangerous enough that Vittorio stopped moving. Matteo descended from the altar and came toward us. He did not take Nico from my hand. He did not grab me for show. He stopped in front of my son and knelt. Exactly as he had at St. Agnes. Little Pilate, he said softly. None of this is because of you. Nico looked at me, then at him. Okay, Matteo rose and turned to face the chapel. This is Rosalia Santoro, he said. My wife. The woman many of you were told abandoned me after choosing to end our child. He let the sentence stand long enough for shame to begin. That story was a lie. Serafina's voice cut in. Thinner now. Matteo, stop this. No, he said. You stopped my life for 6 years, now you will listen. Renzo moved at the side aisle. 2 men brought in a locked case and a monitor meant for the wedding tribute. But Matteo did not drown the room in spectacle. He used only what denial could not survive. A former nurse appeared first by video, face pale, voice shaking. Describing my admission, the sedation, the living fetal heartbeat, Serafina's private orders. Vittorio's promise that loyalty would be rewarded. Then came the altered consent form beside my real signature from old financial records. Then the rooted payments to the clinic director, then the forged separation papers. Then the call logs placing Serafina and Vittorio in direct contact with Celeste's family lawyer weeks before the false filing date. Gasps became silence. Matteo's voice never rose. That made it worse. I was told Rosalia chose a procedure while I was sent across the city on a fake emergency. I was shown a forged signature, I was played edited audio. I was told my child was gone and my wife refused to see me. Months later I was handed a separation petition she never filed. And I signed what I believed was an ending. Celeste lifted her veil then. She turned, not to Matteo, but to Serafina. You told my family he was free. Serafina straightened. Fighting for ground already falling away beneath her. He was abandoned. I preserved his future. Celeste took one slow step backward. No. You curated it. Vittorio found courage where intelligence should have been. The boy could be anyone's. A woman who disappears for 6 years. Matteo turned toward him with a stillness so complete the room itself seemed to shrink. Say that again. Vittorio's mouth closed. Renzo placed one final document on the monitor stand, not a spectacle, just a blade. Timeline match, medical marker comparison, and clinic chain verification, he said. Enough for criminal filing and family claim both. I looked at Matteo sharply. He met my eyes for one brief second. Apology and necessity living there together. He had not taken Nico for a secret test. He had used the records already stolen from us and forced them to say what the truth had said all along. Matteo faced the room again. Nico is my son. The words landed everywhere. Beside me, my child tightened his grip on my hand. Not because he fully understood, but because he understood enough to feel the room shift around him. Matteo's voice changed then. It became lower. More dangerous, but not wild. You did this because Rosalia became impossible to control once she was carrying my heir. You wanted her erased before she became permanent. You wanted a bride who came with obedience and alliances. You wanted my child gone before he could make me choose the woman I loved over the house you built around me. Serafina's composure finally cracked. I protected this family. No, Matteo said. You protected your access to power. She would have ruined you. Mateo took one step toward her. She saved my son. Serafina's gaze flicked toward Nico for one fatal second. I moved in front of him without thinking. Mateo saw it, everyone saw it, and then Serafina, desperate enough to become honest, said the line that ended her: a wife can be replaced. A legacy cannot. The chapel went so silent I could hear one crystal ornament ticking in the air conditioner draft. Mateo's face changed with terrible clarity. And that, he said softly, is why you will never stand near either of them again. No one defended her after that. Renzo's men moved toward Vittorio before he reached the side door. Celeste stepped fully away from the aisle, removed her veil, and set it on an empty chair like she was returning borrowed shame. Serafina looked around for support and found only people avoiding her eyes. Power leaves rooms faster than love ever does. Mateo ended it quickly after that. He did not force me to stand beside him like some restored possession. He did not ask for forgiveness under chandeliers. He did not turn Nico into a symbol for applauding guests. He simply came back to us and said, "We're leaving." We went out through the side garden while the chapel drowned behind us in whispers. Denials, phone calls, and the first real shape of consequences. The garden was cool and quiet. White roses climbed the stone wall, somewhere inside the estate. Serafina's perfect evening was collapsing piece by piece. Outside, my son stood between Mateo and me holding Captain Sky, who had apparently needed to witness history. Nico looked up at Mateo with complete seriousness. Why did you say I am your son? The question was small. The answer was not. Mateo looked at me first. I nodded. Though my heart trembled hard enough to ache, he knelt in front of Nico again. As if that was how all honest things between them had to begin. With the feared man lowering himself until a child did not have to look too far up. Because it is true, Mateo said. I was your father before I knew your name. Nico's eyes widened. He turned to me. Mama, did you know? Tears burned immediately. Yes, sweetheart. I knew. Why didn't you tell me? I crouched beside him. Because I was scared. Of Teo? I looked at Mateo, then back at Nico. Of the people around him. Mateo's voice was quiet and stripped of pride. And she was right to be scared. Nico thought about that with the grave concentration children bring to adult pain they should never have to sort through. So Teo is my papa? If you want him to be, I whispered. Mateo closed his eyes for 1 second like the mercy of that sentence was bigger than he deserved. Nico turned back to him. Are you still my friend? I have seen men back away from Mateo in negotiations. In threats, in dark rooms where fear made everyone smaller. I had never seen anything unmake him the way that question did. His face broke quietly. Just enough for me to see the father beneath the armor. The man beneath the grief. Only if you still want me to be, he said. Nico stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Mateo's neck. You can be papa too, he whispered. But friend rules still stay. Mateo held him like a miracle returned late. Always, he said. I looked away because watching that hurt in a place too tender for witnesses. Later that night, after Nico fell asleep at the lake house with Captain Sky under one arm and Mateo's suit jacket folded at the end of the bed because he said it smelled like outside and safety. Mateo and I stood on the porch again. The lake was black glass. The city beyond the trees kept shining as if nothing had broken open in it that day. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then I said the only honest thing I had. I do not know how to trust you again. Mateo nodded once. I know. I loved you even while I was running from you. That was the worst part. His hand tightened around the railing. I hated you because it was easier than admitting I had failed you. You believed them. Yes. You didn't come for me. His voice turned raw. I thought you did not want to be found. I stared into the dark water. I wanted you every day. I just wanted Nico alive more. When I looked back, his eyes were wet. Mateo Santoro did not cry easily. He looked like a man who had forgotten how and was being forced to remember. I will spend the rest of my life understanding that, he said. I breathed in slowly. He cannot become a Centauro weapon. He won't. They will call him heir. Then I will teach him to answer to his name before anything else. They will try to shape him. Then they will fail. I turned sharply. He softened slightly. Not with threats, he said. I am learning. Despite everything. A laugh escaped me. Small and surprised and real. It hurt. But it was real. Mateo looked at me like that sound had given him something he had no right to ask for. Nico will inherit love before legacy, he said. If I can give him only one clean thing, it will be that. That was not trust, but it was the first stone in a bridge. A week later, we returned to St. Agnes Art House. Not because everything was healed. Not because the city had stopped whispering. Not because law, power, and memory become simple when truth wins a room. We came back because Nico had clay class. Because children still needed paint and paper and songs about cleanup time. And because normal life has to be rebuilt in ordinary afternoons or it never returns at all. The hallway looked the same as the day it changed us. Bright walls, taped drawings, glue on the floor, nobody had noticed. Parents pretended not to stare. Volunteers failed better than before. Mateo walked beside me without an entourage pressing close. Though Renzo's people were near enough if danger forgot its lesson, Nico ran ahead. Then stopped halfway down the hall and turned back with Captain Sky held high. Papa, he called. Mateo froze. Nico grinned wickedly. Face holiday. For one beat Mateo simply stood there. This powerful man ambushed by a child's command in the middle of a paint-stained corridor. Then he did what he had done the first time, what perhaps he would always do when Nico asked for something true. He knelt. This time he knew whose child stood in front of him. This time Nico knew too. This time I was not arriving too late, Mateo smiled. This time I'll... Nico studied the result with the seriousness of a small expert. Better, he said. Still a little villain. But better. Mateo looked at me then. Not as a boss. Not as a man demanding absolution. Only as the father of my son and the husband I had lost to a house full of lies. He held out his hand. He did not pull. He did not demand. He only waited. For 6 years I had survived by leaving first, that afternoon. In the bright hallway where a paper airplane had found the right man before I was ready. I stayed. I put my hand in his. Mateo Santoro once mourned a child who had never died. But the little boy in front of him had done more than survive. He had walked straight through grief with a paper airplane, 3 friendship rules, and a heart brave enough to trust before the adults were ready. And somehow, impossibly, he taught the man everyone feared how to bend without breaking, protect without owning, and become a father by first learning how to be a friend.